Hi, everybody. I'm going to read a chapter right now from The Fields of Home by Ralph Moody, and the story takes place here in Maine. This is primarily for Bert and his friend Cora in China, the country of China, where he works in a school. But anybody else who wants to join in and listen, that's great. It's a good story. Chapter 7 is titled Uncle Levi. It took me a day and a half to finish mowing the orchard, and I had a good time doing it. The mowing machine didn't give me much trouble, and the yellow colt only barked twice. Both times, Grandfather was away from the field, and the old horse hated having his ears wired so much that neither of his barky spells lasted more than a few minutes. Grandfather didn't come near the machine once while I was mowing. He spent about half his time away from the orchard, but every time I saw him, he was swinging aside as fast as he could go. My second afternoon was bad. Grandfather gave me a right-handed snath and scythe, and made me mow under the apple trees with him. I'd always been left-handed, the same as he was, and couldn't make the right-handed scythe come within a foot of going where I wanted it to. I tried hard enough that I got water blisters on both hands, but I couldn't keep the blade from bumping into rocks. Grandfather scolded at me all afternoon. The more he scolded, the worse I did. When the sun was nearly down to the top of the pines, he shouted, "Hang up that snath and scythe and go fetch the cows. Never seen such an awkward, useless boy in all the days of my life." Wow, that must have made him feel good, huh? I was so mad when I brought the cows in, I made up my mind to go back to Colorado just as soon as I could get my suitcase packed. I banged the stanchion bars around the last cow's neck, stuck the hole peg in place, was turning toward the tie-up door when, from just outside, Millie called, "Hurry up, Ralphie. Supper's on the fire, and Levi's here. I done all the rest of the chores already." Then she turned and ran back to the house like a little girl. When I went into the back pantry, I'd have known Uncle Levi was there even if no one had told me, and I couldn't hear his voice. The table was stacked with big paper bags and bundles. Oranges were spilling out of one bag that was lying on its side. From the shape of another, I knew it was crammed full of bananas, and beside half a dozen smaller bags, there were two big bundles in slit brown paper that I knew would be meat. "Hi there, Ralphie," he called to me from the kitchen as soon as I had my cap off. "How's Thomas using you?" I couldn't say anything except, "All right. I didn't know you were coming down." "Didn't know it myself," he called back, till I got Thomas' letter, making out like he was on the point of death. "Thomas, it's a God's wonder you ain't scared 10 years off my life. How many times, right in the midst of haying, have you wrote and let on like you was dying? Ain't feeling well. Ain't feeling well. Ain't been feeling up to scratch for more than a month," Grandfather snapped at him. "Looking pert's a peacock to me," Uncle Levi told him. "Don't calculate there's nothing wrong with you with a little good meat to eat. A little help in haying won't fix. Didn't know Ralphie was down here. Any considerable help to you? Huh! Ain't no more of a farmer than you be. Swings the snath and scythe like it was a flail swingle. Wants to fritter away all his time round the carriage house, tinkering up machinery. By fire, I never seen a boy thought he knowed so tannel much and could do so little. Telling me to plant strawberries and tomatoes. Huh! Take a man a year to learn him you can't cut stone with a scythe." With Grandfather talking that way about me, I didn't want to go into the kitchen. So I pumped a pan full of water, was all ready to wash my hands when Uncle Levi came out into the back pantry. First thing he did was reach out to shake hands and said, "Thomas don't think nobody's a farmer unless he can swing a scythe." The blisters on my hand hurt when Uncle Levi squeezed it. I guess I winced just a little. He turned my hand over and looked at it. Then he reached for the other one, looked at it too. "Thomas, what in God's world you been doing with this boy?" he asked sharply. "Ain't been doing nothing except trying to learn him how to swing a snath and scythe," Grandfather snapped back. "Why ain't you put gloves on him? His hands look like two hunks of half-ate dog meat. Ain't going to have no lily-fingered fiddle around here. Ain't nothing matter with them hands that time and work won't cure. You ever see a decent dirt farmer wearing gloves?" I didn't want to hear them wrangling the very first night Uncle Levi was there, so I said, "They'll be all right just as soon as—" But Uncle Levi cut me off. "Thomas, it's a God's wonder." He stopped right there, dropped my hands, and went back into the kitchen. "Millie, had just put a big slab of steak into the red-hot iron frying pan. It spluttered and hissed so loud I didn't hear what Uncle Levi was saying to Grandfather. They kept wrangling all the time I was washing my face and hands and combing my hair. They didn't shout as much as they had been. Once I heard Grandfather holler, "Mary sent him down here to be made a man of, and by thunder I calculate on making him one." "Just like you done with Frankie," Uncle Levi shouted back. "First thing you know, he'll be gone off somewheres to learn a trade." For a minute, I thought I'd go in and tell them they didn't need to worry, because I was going away right then. But Millie called, "Vittles is ready," and the steak did smell awfully good. Millie didn't act at all as she had for the past 3 days. She had on a pink calico dress that was starched so stiff it could have stood alone, and was as happy as if she were at her own birthday party. As soon as the steak was on the platter, she whisked half a dozen big baked potatoes and a pan of hot biscuits out of the oven. "This is making me hungry." Ugh. And brought a jar of wild strawberry jam from the cellarway and said, "Sit right down here by the window, Levi. It's a sight for sore eyes to see you down here again. Thomas, he's been feeling poorly since spring. It'll do him a sight of good to have you here for a spell. Don't know whenever I seen a piece of yard goods as pretty that you fits me." Ain't nothing, Uncle Levi grumbled as he pulled his chair out to the table. "Scared something terrible might be the matter with Thomas. Didn't have time to do much shopping. Ralphie, didn't know you was here. I'd but fetch you something." Grandfather didn't seem a bit hungry when he first sat down at the table. He only took a little corner of steak onto his plate, and then he kept pushing around with his knife and fork. Millie scolded at him a bit for not eating, then got a cushion and put it behind his back. She scooped out half a baked potato onto his plate, put gravy from the steak platter on it, and spooned him out some of the strawberry jam. But he still only ate a mouthful or two. After a few minutes, she looked up at Uncle Levi and said, "Levi, you got any medicine upstairs in your valise?" She had hardly had the words on his mouth when Grandfather shouted, "Ain't nothing the matter with me. Don't need it. Don't need the tannel stuff, I tell you. I ain't sick and I ain't tired. I just ain't hungry, that's all." Neither of them paid a bit of attention to Grandfather. Uncle Levi was in stocking feet and had them up on the little shelf under the table. He let them drop to the floor, pushed his chair back, and said, "Wouldn't surprise me none if there might be a drop or two up there." Then, while Millie unlaced Grandfather's boots and pulled them off, Uncle Levi went padding up the front stairs. I heard a board or two squeak in the chamber where I'd been sleeping, and in a couple of minutes he came back with a half-empty quart bottle in his hand. There was a broken green sticker over the cork, and a picture of a crow on the label. Grandfather watched, but didn't say anything, while Millie measured a teaspoon of whiskey into the glass, put in a heaping spoonful of sugar, and filled the glass with hot water. It smelled good when she set it beside Grandfather's plate. He wrinkled up his nose a little and grumbled, "Don't need the tannel stuff. Ain't sick." But he picked the glass up, lifted his eyebrows high as he slooped a little sip from the glass. Millie hadn't given the bottle back to Uncle Levi, but he walked around the table and picked it up. Before he put the cork back in, he turned the bottle up and took a big, long swallow. A couple dozen little air bubbles went dancing up through the red liquor. He didn't raise his eyebrows the way Grandfather had. When he took the bottle down, he shut his eyes tight and shook his head like a horse with a fly in its ear. Then he took the bottle back upstairs. While he was gone, Grandfather kept telling me what wicked stuff whiskey was, that the Almighty never planned it for anything but medicine, where people went who drank it just for fun the way Uncle Levi did. He kept sipping, too, and smacked his lips after every sip. When it was all gone, he cut himself a piece of steak bigger than the one I had, and he ate it all. I did the milking and fed the calf, while Millie was washing the supper dishes. When I came back into the house, Grandfather was dozing at the kitchen table. Old Bess was sitting with her head in his lap, and Uncle Levi was asleep in the high-backed rocking chair. He had his feet up on the hot water tank at the back of the stove, and the magazine he'd been reading had fallen on his chest. Millie strained the milk and put it away while I was blowing out the lantern and washing my hands. Then she scrubbed her hands until I thought she'd peel the skin off them. She didn't say a word to me till she'd gone to her room, brought out a long flat bolt of checkered gingham, and stood with the pantry window pane for a mirror, shaping the end of the cloth over her shoulders and around her neck. "Pretty, ain't it?" she asked at last in a low whisper. "Levi don't never come down, but he don't fetch me something pretty." "Does he come very often?" I whispered back. "No telling when he'll come or when he'll go. Comes when Thomas is down sick, or when he makes him think so. Goes when they get to squabbling so devilish hard they can't abide one another no longer. Sometimes Levi has to go back off to Boston where he's got a job of work to do. Brick mason. Devilish good one, I hear tell. Only man roundabouts can put the linings in glass furnaces." As she whispered, she wound the checkered gingham back on the flat spool, folded the paper round it, tucked it under her arm, and held both hands out toward me. "Let's see them hands," she said. She took both my hands in hers, turned the palms up toward the lamp. "Devilish sore, ain't they?" she asked. "Why didn't you let on sooner?" "I didn't let on at all," I told her. "Uncle Levi just happened to notice them when we shook hands." "Levi notices lots of things a body wouldn't count on." "They're all right," I said. "They'll toughen up when I soak them in salt water. And saleratus helps keep the salt from burning so devilish bad. Sit down at the table while I fix you some." Grandfather woke up when I sat down at the table. It was a warm night, and though the wood had burned out, the stove had quite a little heat left in it. I'd have wanted to sit near an open window, but Grandfather opened the oven door, drew the other rocking chair up close, put both feet into the oven. Then he rocked the chair back and forth. Then, as he rocked the chair back and forth, he began to tell me about the time the lightning had struck the big barn in the middle of the night and burned it flat to the ground. Uncle Levi was still asleep in the high-backed rocker, and for a few minutes Grandfather talked about the drone of his snoring. And then his head nodded forward, and he was asleep too. Millie brought the wash basin, half filled with warm water, salt, and soda. As she sat in front of me, she whispered, "Soak 'em good now. I'm going off to bed. You take the corner chamber next beyond Levi's. It's all ready and ain't been slipping since I filled the tick anew last husking time. Lamps is filled and ready there on the mantel. Take care Thomas is awake enough so he don't drop his lamp on the way to bed." Millie slept downstairs in the parlor. Grandfather had his room in the other front corner of the house, just off the dining room and next to the parlor. When I put my hands to soak, she took the lamp from the pantry, went first to Grandfather's room, then I heard her moving quietly in the parlor. After a few minutes, Grandfather's head came up a little way. He began talking about the fire again. He was still more asleep than awake. His voice was soft. The words came in little gusts, like the sound of a summer breeze blowing through the dry grass. "'Twa'n't long after Frankie Portland learned a trade. Not a critter saved. Old Hannibal bellowed something awful. 20-odd feet short in the big barn." His head jerked right up straight for a minute. He looked over at me and said, "One day I and you will build the piece back onto it, Ralphie." He spoke loud enough that he woke Uncle Levi, but in another minute they were both snoring again. The salt water made my hands sting to beat the band for a little while, and every muscle in my body ached, but I was awfully tired. Next thing I knew, Grandfather was shouting, "Levi! Ralphie!" I must have been asleep there for a couple of hours, my hands soaking in the pan and my head resting on the edge of the table. When I opened my eyes, the moon had moved around so it was coming in the south window. Grandfather was yawning and rubbing his bald spot. "Gory sakes alive," he yawned. "I must have nodded off a minute or two. Come, Levi, it's time all honest folks was abed." Grandfather was more awake than any of us, so I didn't worry about him carrying his lamp, but lighted two from the mantel and went upstairs with Uncle Levi. His eyes were still only half open when I picked up my suitcase from beside his bed and went on to the next room. I had just crawled into bed when Uncle Levi pushed open the door between our rooms. He had undressed down to his long underwear and had a little round nightcap on his head. He had his lamp in his hand and peered at me from under his eyebrows as though he were looking over the top of glasses. "Sleep tight, boy," he whispered. "Watch out Thomas don't work the tail off you." And then he went back into his own room. And there's a picture on the bottom of that page of Uncle Levi standing back too. That's him. And that's the end of that chapter. Okay, Brett, Cor, we'll see you again soon, okay? Bye-bye.